All right, Dennis, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, I watched a lot of NBA TV this past week with 80s Week, so it dawned on me, 90s Week is coming up. Now, you've been providing great work as an analyst over on NBA TV for quite some time now, and listeners can check out D. Scott this Friday, the 28th, on NBA Game Time at midnight Eastern Time. But with 90s Week coming up, any chance we'll see you back in uniform? Memorial Day 1995, Fame game in Indiana with what was it, like 4 different buzzer beaters in 8 seconds? Will that be real, or we have to wait with bated breath?
I think for some of the new listeners and viewers, I think it's something you have to tune into and watch, because you bring up a great point. Even though I've lived through it, sometimes you kind of forget it. And that's one of the reasons I like when we do shows like that, because it kind of reminds the new generation who kind of paved the way and kind of set up the scene for the new guys who were able to shoot the basketball and have fun like we did.
That was actually one of my favorite NBA seasons. I was 9 years old. I started following the NBA in 91. I was a big fan of that Celtics team. It was a good year. They played a great game with the Bulls, good game with the Pacers. Like, hoping that is on 90s Week as well. But that Magic team, the dynasty that wasn't, not to throw salt in the wounds, but I know you must kick yourself believing you should have 5 championship rings. But it's interesting, throughout the course of sports history, when we think of these teams that we ordain, that Magic team, you go to baseball, I remember the Seattle Mariners in the 90s with Griffey and A-Rod, Buhner. You traded Jay Buhner for what? We all remember that line, Randy Johnson. Everyone had them winning like 3 to 4 World Series. They didn't win nothing, and all those guys peeled off. Now Oklahoma City, they made the finals in 2012 when all, they're young players when they were early 20s. Even when they lost, people pegged them for multiple championships. But months later, they commit one of the worst atrocities in human history, a trade that is almost on par with Bill Russell for the Ice Capades, with Milwaukee receiving a bag of avocados for Kareem with Los Angeles. They gave away James Harden. They've suffered injuries in recent years and at the worst times. Here we are 4+ years later, and it's kind of like make or break for them. I think that's the primary storyline going into the NBA this season, and we'll find out. But could this truly be it for them?
Well, the way you broke it down is so perfect, because when we look back at our Magic team, the biggest problem everyone realized obviously was Shaq. There's no reason, a blind man with Ray Charles sitting next to him would realize Shaq was going to be who he was. And very similar, knowing that, James Harden is not Shaq, and I'm not saying that obviously, but that piece of that puzzle has never been able to be replaced. So OKC has the opportunity to get back there if they can finally stay healthy. To your mention, they was able to sign Enes Kanter, which a lot of people thought he was going to be that new piece that you had to hold on to and maybe go over the luxury tax. This has to be the year, because no one wants to admit Kevin Durant's done an excellent job of kind of downplaying it, but does he want to go to L.A.? Does he want to go back to D.C. where he grew up? Obviously, that now is kind of put to rest a little bit, because he didn't sign with Under Armour, because Under Armour was supposedly a big player in that so-called movement. Obviously, he's back with Nike. He's not going anywhere. So, to me, my gut feeling, opening up a restaurant, doing so much community service you've done in OKC, I think Kevin Durant stays. But we've seen things crazier happen. LaMarcus Aldridge leaving Portland and going to San Antonio, and then DeAndre Jordan going to Dallas, then going back to the Clippers. So things could change for Kevin Durant in the season, but I do agree with you. This is the year that they have to get back to the finals and win it all, or at least get back to where, if you're a Thunder fan, you're feeling that, okay, we are back where we're supposed to be, maybe more finals appearance will be coming.
Yeah, it definitely should be. I think that's the primary story to watch. If they lose in the first or second round again, I think you could see what very well happened to that Magic team, where eventually it just sort of disintegrated for them, where, in Orlando was more of the course over a few years, but in Oklahoma City, once again, that could fall apart. But I don't want to sort of get into, where he's going to go, Los Angeles, but one thing that I always sort of think about is, let's say, Kevin Durant or any other premier free agent. They play in the Western Conference. You have to run a gauntlet every single year to get to the NBA Finals. Are there opportunities now in the Eastern Conference where, if you're free agent X, and let's say it is Kevin Durant, do you look at the East as just, quite frankly, an easier place to win and, play relevant games in May and June?
You look at Cleveland and you look at Chicago, that's pretty much it. There is no other dogfight night in and night out where you're beat up at the end of the season, where on the Western Conference, from Golden State to the Clippers to the Rockets, to Memphis Grizzlies. I mean, you can never leave them out of the mix as well. You know that Western Conference, you're going 7 deep, and you get all the way to number 8 now, and then you got a guy like Anthony Davis who adds a jump shot to his game. So now even the 8th seed is not a cakewalk anymore. So to your point, if you were a top-notch guy and you want to go to the Eastern Conference, your only nightmares are Cleveland and Chicago night in and night out.
Yeah, that's sort of how I look. I mean, you mentioned, obviously, we know the West is a gauntlet, but even in the East, there really does not seem to be any up-and-coming teams, sort of like the way you can look at a New Orleans with Anthony Davis. In the Eastern Conference, and if you're a player who's going to be a free agent in 2016, and you may look at, a destination that's very attractive, that's just playing in Los Angeles, which is attractive for anybody, but just we've seen recently this past summer, we've seen Greg Monroe sign with like a place like Milwaukee or whatnot. Because you look at the East, I mean, Cleveland, let's be honest, we can peg them for the NBA Finals, barring some sort of non-catastrophic injury to LeBron James. And the West, a team that's as dominant as Golden State was last year, 67 wins and one of, the 6 teams in NBA history with a double-digit point differential. They are far from a prohibitive favorite to, they technically could lose in the first round. So that's kind of just how I look at things, and I don't understand why maybe more, I guess I should probably understand, as I think that was the trend this past offseason, but I am very curious to see if there could be a continued trend of players looking at the Eastern Conference as, quite frankly, a better opportunity for them.
I think guys would do that, but let's be very honest to your listeners that it's very... You said earlier you started following the NBA when you were 9 years old, so you were following trends where in the early 90s things were changing where the Lakers and the Celtics pretty much ran the NBA, so to speak, in the 80s, right? You had your Sixers championship in there and things like that, in the early 80s. And in the 90s, the younger teams, like our Magic teams, came in, and then you asked yourself, will the talent change? Shaquille O'Neal leaves Orlando and he goes to the Lakers. That kind of changed the whole landscape of how the 90s went into the 2000s. Does a guy come over like Durant? Does a guy, I can't think what LaMarcus Aldridge stayed in the Western Conference, but if LaMarcus Aldridge would have went to, say, Washington, would that have put Washington where they needed to be a serious contender with LeBron? Because LeBron has taken different talent to the finals 5 straight years. It's unbelievable. And you say to yourself, if he could find guys that can make shots, that's all he really needs. Because if KYRIE stays healthy, it's probably a different series, I think we all would agree. Because he was looking for someone else to make shots down the stretch, just like Steph Curry was looking for someone else to make shots. And Draymond Green made shots, they went small, and Iguodala made shots, and the rest is history. So if I'm making that change, when I make it, do I have enough of a supporting cast around me to compete right now with the King?
I got to shift gears a little bit. After all, it's Celtics Beat, it's a Celtics show. I've discussed this ad nauseum here. I pretty much lectured my entire audience, but I truly value your opinion here. We got you on the show. I want to get your opinion on this because you spent many years in the NBA. I've been a little concerned with the roster situation for the Celtics because they have a lot of players at one position, and not only that, they all feel they warrant playing time, and they're all in contract years, most importantly. Now, I talked to plenty of people in the local media here on the show, and their opinion is pretty much unanimous. This is great. It creates competition on the roster. Players will naturally improve eternally because their job will not be safe. Me, I do not see it that way. I think it creates added stress, constantly looking over one soldier. And B, I think it's a recipe for chemistry issues. Team loses a game, and it's like, you can have one guy, well, if I was out there, et cetera, et cetera. As a former player, what's your perspective on this? And is this glut, if you will, that the Celtics have a long, at the front line, a good thing for them this coming year?
I think the competitive spirit is right where it needs to be. I understand your concern because we've seen it happen before. But if you value my opinion, the reason I think your guys are going to be okay is because of Brad Stevens, period.
That's what everyone's saying. I think it's like too much to put on him, though.
No, it's not. If a David Black can come over from overseas and never coach in an NBA game in the first month, we're talking about you need to fire David Black, then I believe that Brad Stevens is the guy that can handle that intensity that you need in a practice setting every day, where guys are going to have that competitive spirit where, you know what, I can't have a bad day today because someone may take my job. I want that in my locker room every day, and I think Brad Stevens is the right person for that.
Yeah, but I still question the stress level, and I'm definitely not going to question you because you played in the league, and I never will. But I still question a daily stress level, and I know it could create a very competitive situation, but just a constant of looking over your shoulder, and the fact that, you can't really mess up once because you are in a contract year, and a guy like David Lee's playing for his last contract, and Jared Sullinger, you really think that there's just going to be no issues at all possibly there?
No, and see, all those things is that if David Lee just showed you he can win a championship and play the right way and can still be the right guy, I'm sure he's going to show guys, look, I just won a championship and I showed the rest of the world how to sacrifice for the betterment of the team. I'm sure he can bring that same experience and show those guys with the Celtics, like, hey, no matter what our contract may be, we still got to play together to win. If we win, it shows you that we all get paid. But if we lose, none of us get paid.
Well, I guess I'm a voice in the wilderness upon that. I'm not going to back off that standing. We are going to have to wait till the season does begin, end of October.
Now, Larry, I don't want you to back off on it. What I want you to do to hold me accountable is watch how Brad Stevens handled the situation. And I don't know if we got cut off earlier, is that the reason the Celtics made the playoffs last year is not because of the players, it's because of Brad Stevens.
Okay.
Think about the turnstile of players he had throughout the year, and he still makes the playoffs. That's why he got consideration for Coach of the Year, like Kevin McHale, because they had, I think, the third or fourth most changed lineups in the whole NBA, and they still made the playoffs. In the Eastern, now obviously the Eastern Conference is not as tough as the Western Conference, but Brad Stevens was still in consideration and still got, I think, 4 or 5 votes of Coach of the Year because of all the different players that Danny Ainge gave him. And finally, after the All-Star break, he figured it out and they make the playoffs.
Well, I love it when you said we'll hold you accountable, and you can hold me accountable. We definitely will. We'll definitely get you back on as the season goes along. But Dennis Scott, NBAtv, you can follow D. Scott on Twitter at 3DZ. I've been following you on Twitter for quite some time because I can't help but seeing those pictures of you with the grill and whatnot, considering what kind of omnivore I am. But definitely worth the follow. Dennis, thanks so much for joining us here on Celtics Beat.
No problem. Thanks for having me.